Hey guys, welcome back to Critical Flick. Today I'll be reviewing Civil War. Civil War is the newest film from Alex Garland, who's one of my favorite directors. I love Ex Machina. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I love Annihilation. I think Devs is a really good show if you ever get a chance to check it out. I know people don't love Men, and it isn't the best movie in the world, but I did appreciate kind of the risks he took with it. But I love to see that he's really back fully in form again. This film follows a group of war photographers who are trying to travel from New York City to the Capitol in Washington, D.C. while the Civil War is raging in America. We're seeing the collapse of kind of the society that we live in. There's different alliances across the country, and they're all converging on Washington, D.C. to kind of take out the president and overthrow the government. To say right away, I fully appreciate people's criticisms of this film, feeling that it's kind of shallow, not really diving into the politics of what's happening, maybe thinking that the politics are a little silly looking from the outside. A lot of people have mentioned, the fact that California and Texas are kind of together in this Western alliance, and they don't really dive into it a lot in this film. The weird thing about this movie, while I do think it is a phenomenal film, it doesn't dive into the actual politics of what are happening. It doesn't really tell you exactly why the Civil War is happening, what's going on with these different alliances. It really is more about these war photographers and seeing that desensitization of what it's like to be thrown in to a combat zone, especially in your own home country. That's where I think this film really excels, whether it being the performances of the actors playing the war photographers themselves, or you the audience seeing it from this very different lens, not of a actual combatant or maybe of a large picture seeing these moving pieces, but as someone on the ground just as kind of a passive witness. They do that in a lot of unique ways, whether it be the use of cinematography or even kind of the score of the film, the soundtrack, if you will. They play this kind of almost lighthearted music during some really visceral and graphic moments, and it kind of shows you that idea of being detached from the violence that you're witnessing. And that can play in different ways when it comes to the themes of this movie. Obviously, it can be a cautionary tale about following this path of bipartisanship and divide and all the things that can lead up to an actual civil war in America, but at times it can be used to almost tell the idea of us as an audience watching horrible things happening and just letting it pass by and letting these things continue to develop and happen. I think the performances of everyone in this film were phenomenal. Kristen Dunst is a real standout as Lee Smith, who's this grizzled war photographer. She's kind of the top in her field, and she's trying to cover this story like she has covered many other foreign wars that she's been thrown into. And seeing this affect her and seeing this kind of change in her character and her relationships with her other, co-workers, it's something that I feel like by the end of the film, she gives a phenomenal character arc. And that's one of the things that I really loved about this movie, is it has kind of contrasting character arcs. Haley Spaney is playing this young woman who wants to really get into the field of war photography. She sees Lee as kind of a hero, and she kind of takes her under her wing unwillingly. And by the end of the film, she's kind of gone in the opposite direction. Seeing these character arcs and this crossing of experience was really fascinating to me. It's laid over this juxtaposition of the Civil War happening in America, and I know a lot of people probably were disappointed that there isn't more action or more combat or more actual war in this movie, but I love that it goes into that drama and those interpersonal relationships, and that's why I think the movie stands out for me individually. Wagner Moura, who plays Joel in the film, also gives a phenomenal performance as kind of this very likable, charismatic, happy-go-lucky character who by the end is really struggling with what's happening around him. And seeing these characters who have so much confidence by the beginning of the film feel so shaken by the events that they've experienced, it really sticks with you as an audience member. Jesse Plemons makes an appearance in this film as well, and he gives one of the most disturbing performances I've seen in many years. And that's one scene that I think many people will walk away from feeling like, wow, this movie is actually going for it. It's really guttural at times. So I do think he gives a great job there. He does that so many times in films. It feels like when he shows up, sometimes you're going to get some messed up stuff happening. Stephen McKinley Henderson plays kind of an older photographer in the story, and he is kind of the heart of this film. And that's one thing that kind of surprised me about this movie. With it taking place in this really brutal reality of an American Civil War, there's a lot of heart to be had. The movie really tells the story of people trying to work together and kind of human nature and how we can be interconnected and how we can try to work with one another while also telling a story about our ultimate divide and how everyone is capable of atrocities and how you just never know who your enemy is at the end of the day. I think on a technical level, this film is very well executed. I think the visual effects, whether they be practical or CGI, worked really well. The actual battle scenes towards the end of the film, I feel like they felt intense. The sound design and the overall score of this film was so powerful, and I think it helps add almost like a haunting element to it. I saw the film in IMAX and I thought it looked great. I thought it sounded great. I think being thrown into this experience as an American audience, seeing American cities or American spaces that you kind of grew up in is kind of haunting. For me in particular, I grew up in the Northeast and I don't live very far from Charlottesville, is where part of this film takes place. And having kind of seeing this setting, even though I know it wasn't actually filmed there, but the idea of it being filmed there and kind of trying to capture that and seeing kind of the events happening in New York and DC, it's so bizarre to see that take place in a not fully ridiculous and bombastic way. We've seen movies, obviously, with war or even catastrophes that take place in American cities, but having it take place in a way that is a little more subtle and maybe a little more tactical, for me at least, was just that much more disturbing. So overall, if I were to score this movie, I would give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's one of the best films that I've seen this year, and one of the best films I've seen in a while. I thought, I was really worried this film, for me personally, was going to dive into more of the politics. I didn't really want to see that. I thought that that would be something that would just create such a unnecessary discourse around this film, and I know that some people will be disappointed in that, and I fully understand that. If you're going into this movie, you probably thought it was going to dive into that. You probably thought it was going to be more about like the war elements and the movements of the war, and not about these individual people traveling across the landscape of the war. But for me, I think it ended up being the best version of what it could be. So if you check it out, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below, particularly if you didn't like it. I always love to hear people's opinions. Like I said, I understand that there's going to be probably a significant amount of people that won't like this movie for the reasons that I've listed, and I would love to hear what you think and maybe what you have liked to see from this film. So again, thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you guys next time.